Constitution has been hailed as one of the most progressive in the world. It belongs to all South Africans. But with poverty, inequality and unemployment continuing to affect so many in our country, does the Constitution really secure our future? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Krivani Pillay, standing in for Bongani Bingwa this evening. Now, in assessing 25 years of democracy, tonight we focus on our Constitution, our constitutional rights and the Constitutional Court. The Constitution was signed into law by former President Nelson Mandela on the 10th of December 1996. It's been amended 17 times since. Each amendment was made with the aim to deepen democracy and create a better life for all South Africans. The last amendment of the Constitution was the 17th Amendment Act of 2012. The amendment was aimed at strengthening the independence of the judiciary and the positions the Office of the Chief Justice as the head of the judiciary. So on our poll question tonight, we're asking, does the Constitution fulfill its promises to South Africans? You can choose from three colors: green, yes; yellow, maybe; and red, no. Interact with us on our poll topic on Facebook and Twitter. Remember to use the hashtag SABCDG25 and SABC News. And we'd love to hear from you through WhatsApp videos to 065 862 4548. Our producer Lindy Wemabena takes a look at some constitutional changes in the last 25 years.
The end of apartheid in South Africa brought about hope and much expectation in a fledgling democracy. For the first time in more than 400 years, South Africans of all races could vote and choose their preferred leaders in the country's first democratic election on 27 April 1994. The poll was ushered through a 1993 interim constitution, pending the finalization of a final document which came into effect in 1996. This was the symbolic end of apartheid. Now all South Africans enjoy equal rights, and this court served to safeguard the Constitution, its interpretation and enforcement. 17 amendments have been made to the document so far, changing South Africa's political and social landscape.
For every citizen to be truly free to make a political choice, including which party to join and which not to vote for, or which political cause to campaign for or support, not only must the information be held in one form or another, it must also be reasonably accessible to potential voters.
Soon, politicians will have to disclose their funders. The death penalty is a thing of the past. Prisoners' right to vote is affirmed. Same-sex marriages are recognized, and women in African and Muslim customary marriages are entitled to inheritance. South Africa is also one of the few countries in the world whose constitution protects citizens' rights to housing, healthcare services, as well as water and sanitation. In a groundbreaking ruling in 2002, the Constitutional Court ordered government to remove restrictions on the use of nevirapine, which prevents mother-to-child transmission of HIV.
As a woman like myself, I have 28 years living with HIV and AIDS. And I also have a son who is 20 years old. And my son have not been infected because of the nevirapine that this man in the Constitutional Court help us with.
I love the fact that we've got the freedom of expression, we can hold our leaders accountable, and that we, as young people, we live to experience. I mean, we know what was happening before we had our constitution in power, and therefore we are experiencing the new democracy where we also feel like we have a voice.
Many people come from other countries, yet still are being mistreated. So we need to fight for what is right and have the equality with each other.
The proposed constitutional amendment to allow government to expropriate land without compensation is without doubt one of the most hotly contested constitutional issues in our democracy. But it's precisely this exercise that allows us to celebrate one of the world's progressive constitutions. Lindy Mapena, Constitution Hill, Johannesburg.
And thank you to our producer, Lindiwe Mabena. Well, joining the conversation now is Teresa Yates, Deputy National Director of the Legal Research Centre. Teresa, a Legal Resource Centre, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And looking forward to the conversation. And first and foremost, how do you view our Constitution?
Well, I work at an organization that has as one of its main missions and visions to ensure that everyone who lives in South Africa is able to access the rights that are in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. So I believe very strongly that the South African Constitution is a very good and important framework for our government and for the laws that create rights for citizens and other people who reside here.
In terms of the notable changes made to our Constitution, we know that 17 have been made. There's calls for many more to be made. Take us through some of those amendments and perhaps how significant have they been?
Well, perhaps one of the significant amendments to our Constitution has been, and I think it was noted in your preview to the show, is that the 17th Amendment to the Constitution really made the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court the head of the judiciary in South Africa. And I think that's important an important move with regards to the structure of the judiciary and how it works and how it's made accountable to the highest courts in the land in some ways. Other notable amendments was, well, first there was an amendment to allow for floor crossing of political parties, both nationally and in the provinces, and for those people who floor crossed to maintain their seats in Parliament and therefore to change the composition of parliaments. But that amendment was then overturned eventually to say that you could cross the floor, but you would not guarantee that you could maintain your seat in Parliament. So that was one of them. Allocation of seats would not be changed. And then there were, an amendment to change the title of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Appeal to Judge President, and vice versa. The President of the Constitutional Court title was changed to Chief Justice, just to give, I think, in people's minds an idea, a better idea of what is the hierarchy of the judiciary. What we have to be clear on is that over the 20 plus years of constitutionalism in South Africa, there hasn't been an amendment which has shifted the rights that are guaranteed of citizens and people who live in South Africa in terms of the Bill of Rights. Those rights have stayed intact over the years. So the amendments have just, I think, tightened the structure of our democracy more rather than the substance of what the Constitution intends to do.
Having said that, Teresa, are South Africans fully educated, fully aware of their constitutional rights?
Some are and some are not. In any democracy, I think there's an obligation, not just of government, but also of civil society, to make people aware of what their rights are. Often organizations like the Legal Resources Center come in contact with people who don't know specifically what their rights are, but they know that how they're living and the things that are happening to them should not be happening in a post-apartheid democracy. So people have an idea that certain things are right and wrong, and people know, I think, what it means to live a life of dignity. And many South Africans know that the conditions under which they're living, where they don't have access to proper housing, where they don't have access to land, where they don't have access to a clean environment, they know they're not living dignified lives. So they know that something is wrong. And then sometimes they come in contact with people who can help help them to fight those conditions. And,
now, our
and
Constitution has been described as unique because it includes what constitutional scholars refer to as positive rights, and it requires them, the state, to enact on those policies that minimize inequality. Give us, a few examples of this.
Well, in our Constitution, there's an obligation for the state to provide for housing, for education, for a clean environment, for land reform. The property clause mandates the state to implement a very broad and far-reaching land reform in order to deal with the injustices of the past. A right to education, and other rights. So these rights are known in legal circles sometimes as third-generation rights because they put a positive obligation on the government to deliver something. So to look at the resources that it has and to allocate those resources in such a way that they are promoting social justice and in South Africa a transition into a society that is more cohesive and one in which people have more access to opportunities.
Fantastic. We're going to continue the discussion and focus on constitutional court and that judgment. So after the break, we also want to gauge your views on whether the Constitution fulfills its promises to South Africans. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, and I'm not alone. We have the soulful, Grammy-winning Soweto Gospel Choir who'll be performing for us later on in the show. Trust. Such a simple thing to say, but such a huge thing to do. Outsurance is a name you can trust because paying claims quickly is the most important thing we do.
I got a call from a lady called Tabsing from Outsurance, and she was very friendly and she explained everything to me that I needed to know. Only 177 rands a month for 50,000 rands worth of cover. That also includes my 3 kids, and they get 10,000 rands worth of cover each. After the call that I got, I felt at ease. I can trust them with anything.
At Outsurance, we base your premiums on your unique profile to offer you the cheapest premium we can. On average, 50,000 rand of cover will only cost you 4 rand a day. And if you already have a funeral plan, when last did you shop around?
With Outsurance, you can pause the policy and then you can continue to pay the policy again. My monthly premium is 163 rands and I'm covered for 50,000 rands. I've included my 2 children and they're both covered for 10,000 rands each. I've never had a policy with Outsurance, but I've got friends and family that I've got, so they recommended Outsurance to me. So I think it's extremely special.
And because you work hard to keep you and your loved ones protected, the Outsurance Funeral Plan rewards your loyalty with a month's payment holiday for every 12 premiums you pay. Finally, a low-cost funeral plan with a payment holiday. Wouldn't you trust them with your policy? SMS quote to 44506 or visit outsurance.co.za to complete a free quote on a funeral plan tailored to suit your needs and budget. Outsurance Funeral Plan. You always get something out.
Welcome back. It's all about you here on the Democracy Gauge. Now, our next segment, The People's View, allows you to interact with us live and share your views candidly. Let's find out what you had to say through WhatsApp videos.
Our constitution is failing us as South Africans. We never fulfill their promises. I'm Ayala Sodawa in Hartbeck.
I don't think the constitution, they have done any promises to the South Africans, because first thing, we are led by the political parties, and there is still a lot of corruptions and inequality. So it's still a long way to go to fulfill those promises.
South Africa's constitution is often hailed as one of the most progressive in the world. Unfortunately, the question that you're asking can be answered objectively, and in my view, most of the ideals enshrined in our constitution have not yet been realized, and part of the reason for that is that we are still a very young democracy, and secondly, we have a problem with implementation. There are great laws in our country that derive from the constitution itself, but they are not effectively implemented at all levels of government, nationally, provincially, and locally.
And we always love to hear your views on the matter. Now we continue the conversation with Teresa Yates, Deputy National Director of the Legal Resources Centre. Teresa, at this point I want to focus on the Constitutional Court. Theoretically, the Con-Court can hear any matter, not only a constitutional matter. But what is an example of what I've been reading about called the arguable point of law of general importance? What does that mean?
Well, I think that is a point that goes to the court that needs clarity from the court. It doesn't necessarily have to go through the High Court and then the Supreme Court of Appeal. It can be a point that would be that could be deemed significant enough by the Constitutional Court that even though it may not on its face raise a constitutional issue, it may cause implications for rights contained in the Constitution.
All right. Then let's go through some of the notable judgments then coming out of the Constitutional Court. Okay.
So there have been many. Obviously, over 25 years, there's been a lot of judgments from the court. I think one of the most, the first case of the court was the death penalty case, Makonyane case, which abolished the death penalty in South Africa, which was very significant. Grootboon was a case that established the obligation of the state to provide housing for people who were living in substandard and undignified conditions. The case of Mohammed decided that suspects in South Africa could not be extradited to jurisdictions where they might face the death penalty, because we as a society have rejected that form of radical form of punishment. Richtersveld was a case that, and also a significant case that established the rights of communities to claim customary rights in terms of land reform and land rights. So if you could show that you're living as a customary society and community, not within traditional forms of ownership or community organization, you still had a right to relief in terms of our Constitution, Section 25. And of course, Fourie, which established the rights of same-sex couples to marry. Those are just a few of the cases determined in terms of our Constitution and handed down by our court, which has promoted the rights of citizens to access the Bill of Rights and the rights that are contained thereof.
I want to talk about the big one now, the one that's on everybody's mind, a majority of South African, and that's the amendment with regards to access to land.
Yes.
Where are we with this process, and what is the most important thing that South Africans are missing when it comes to discussing, arguing, amending this part of the Constitution?
Well, obviously, land rights are a very important issue in South Africa, given our history. So it's very emotional on all sides, and it's an issue that has to be resolved by the state, largely by the state. So the main debate that's circulating is that there's an idea, and you hear it in some of the comments, that it's the Constitution itself that blocks people accessing their rights. So there's a belief that land reform has not been delivered. Land reform has not moved because the Constitution does not state explicitly that the state can expropriate without compensation. So there's a call now from various corners, from academics, from activists, and some NGOs that therefore the Section 25 of the Constitution should be amended to explicitly state that expropriation without compensation is a tool that the government can use in order to advance land reform. Yes, I know the LRC has put forth comments to Parliament which has stated that within the current framework of Section 25, the state has the tools in hand to expropriate land with or without compensation, but it hasn't done it. So the question that's outstanding is not whether the tools are there, but whether the political will is there to actually expropriate land without compensation. But
we've been asking our viewers if they feel that the Constitution fulfills its promises to them as the citizens. And we've been getting a mixed bag of answers as our viewers are watching on screen, both on Twitter and Facebook. Do you think that the Constitution disempowers government?
No.
Do you think it's stalling economic transformation?
I don't. My personal view is that I don't believe that to be true. The Constitution, I think people... we put too much weight on the Constitution in terms of what that document can and should do for us. The Constitution is a framework for us. It's like if you're building a house, you have your plans. So, and I think the Constitution creates the framework. It creates your state. It creates the rules by which your state must operate. And in a modern society, it creates the rights that the state must protect. And it also creates limitations on what the state can do. But you need a state, and you need an active citizenship that knows what the state must do in order to apply the pressure on people who are in positions of power to deliver those rights that are contained in the Constitution.
So my question to you then, with the three paddles, does the South African Constitution fulfill its promises to us South Africans? Yes, maybe, no.
Well, I would say yes. It's an aspirational document which in many ways, in most ways, fulfills the promise of democracy.
Teresa Yates, great talking to you. Thank you very much for your insight. Now, after the break, we meet 63-year-old Rosaline Elise Jantjies, better known as Tannie Poppy, the Roosterbrood Queen of the Karoo. Stay with us.
Standoff between Alexandra residents and police. Following a forced eviction, officers retaliated by firing rubber bullets.
They just shoot at us. They don't even want to listen to us.
They've done us wrong as a community.
What created the situation? What led to these angry words being exchanged?
You're forcing me to say I have doubt. What is that thing? Don't treat me like a small boy. Don't do that. Because Human Rights Commission is not God.
Vuzimusi Dlamini, he's the senior investigator there, and he asked the question, can you just explain what this particular project did? Because of course there were a lot of money in that particular project, but it looks like little has been delivered.
We stay on the visuals, they're busy shooting.
We drove around this.
Welcome back. Now, through the democracy gauge, SABC News profiles different South Africans and their assessment of 25 years of democracy. Today we meet 63-year-old Rosaline Elise Jantjies, better known as Tannie Poppy, the roosterbird queen of the Karoo. She's well known for her freshly baked roosterbird from her small food stall next to the N1 in Landsberg.
Ek is Rosaline Elise Jantjies gebore. Op 'n baie vroeë ouderdom het ek gaan trou tussen 13 en 14. En toe ek getroud met Hendrik Natal. En uit die huwelik is 7 kinders gebore. Toe trek ek met my plaas toe. Dit was moeilik geweest om aan te pas by die plaas want ek is van die dorp af. Ek uit die werk uit, huis toe, van die huis af, werk toe. Dis hoe ek nog groot geword het en dis hoe ek nog vandag nog mee stand op. So ek ga baie kwaad as mense so rond sit. Baie keer so ek kom afstap en die mense so vroeg môre in die son met hulle gowns aan. Dan sê ek, hier is die huis al skoon gemaak, hulle so vroeg in die son sit. Nou ja, ek en Jacob was toe 26 jaar getroud geweest. En toe is ons geskei en toe is ek weer terug op my nooiens van. En toe kom Frikkie van Asmus nou Touwsrivier toe om vir ons te kom wys hoe om op die N1 te werk. En toe kom het so dat ons nog aan trou. En ons is getrouwd en ek toe Leisburg toe gekom trek. En toe sien ek een dag, hier is broodtekort. Toe kom die kontrak uit vir die museum vir broodbak in die buiteoond. Nou dis waar my broodbedryf begin het. En ek bak die brood en ek vraag my brood R9,50. En dan kom die oom Piet. En die mense mol vir die brood, want het is gebakte brood en die brood is goedkoop. Ek weet mos nou nie, het is my eerste besigheid dat ek begin. En Piet geef my 'n braaisteen, en Piet geef my 2 strandstoele om op te sit. En Piet het vir my mooi gehelp dat ek daarvoor kan kom. In die 90's was ek toe al getroud. Ek het al 'n klomp kinders gehad. Daai jare was my nog die arbeidspartye geweest. So ek het nog dit gestem, en toe sê hulle my, maar dit het nou weer gechase naar die ANC toe, en toe vraag ek nou weer, wat is die ANC? Toe sê ons nou, laat Mandela moes nou in bewind kom, en al die 10 toe sê ek, nou moet mense vir hulle stem. Toe sê ek nou, vir wie moet die mense nou regtig stem? Nou toe het ek ook maar nog een stem ANC. Sien die? En toe laat met die ding, ek gaan ook nie meer stem, want ek weet nie waarvoor ek stem nie. So nou wat weet die plaasmense wat daar op die plaas is? Sit achter die skape en die bokke, sit achter die eie en knip, dis wat ons geken het die jare. Ek dink, ons land is deur mekaar, maar daar is nog goeie dele ook in ons land. Want as ek dink, voor tyd, kon ons nie som net oorals ingestap het nie. En vandag kan ons ook oorals instap. Na die 25 jaar of 30 jaar van democratie, is daar toch verbetering in ons land. Maar ek denk wat nog kort komt in ons land, daar moet meer werk geskep word. Zodat allemaal iets ordentelijk kan verdienen en voor zijn eigen geld werkt. En dan weet hij ordentelijk werkt met zijn geld. Hij kan niet met zijn geld morsen, hij heeft zwaar daarvoor gewerkt. Ik kies geel.
And that's how we say goodbye. Let's take a look at the results for today's poll. It's on your screen right now. Thank you very much for watching. From me, Krivani Pillay, and the entire Democracy Gauge team, good night.